Hi, I'm Lucy. Lovely to meet you all. Very excited to be here for the cybersecurity conference and be part of some of the discussions. Great, yeah, such a joy to be here. I'm Lucy Munday. I've worked across a number of security as a software companies, starting out in business intelligence, moving to analytics, process automation, RPA, some discussion about that, and now working in cyber. And I describe that trajectory as sort of nice to have, to business critical, to you now can't survive without it. You know, seeing some of Tom's stats, you really do need something in place, a tech stack to protect your companies against cyber risk. And what does Tessian do? So we are market leader in integrated cloud email security. As Dave said, we are pretty well known on the island. So we work with Aztec, we work with Acorian, Jersey FSC, yeah, a number of companies over here. So yeah, again, great to be over in Jersey. We also have a strong network globally. We work with the likes of BNY, Bain Capital, Intertrust, San, and we're backed by tech investors such as Sequoia, Balderton, Axel. Ultimately, our customers use our advanced machine learning algorithm and behavioral intelligence model to protect against advanced attacks and prevent data loss. Hopefully there, as a result, improving the security culture in the company and notifying end users about the risk. So it's about this sort of bringing together the machine learning, the automation that we were discussing there, and empowering humans, the sort of the driving force, the engine of our companies. There we go. So why am I focusing on tackling human error? This Forrester report demonstrates why, one, human error and human error with email is still the biggest threat vector that we're seeing across our organizations. So that's why I'm focusing on tackling human error and how we can protect that human layer today. So as part of that human threat, that human protection, we see two clear areas. Inbound threats, so anything coming in, anything that's malicious coming into your environment, and anything leaving, so any outbound risks, anything leaving your environment. So that will form the basis for my agenda. I will then wrap up and conclude with how we can get the most out of this Cyber Awareness Month and what we can ultimately do as cyber professionals. So let's kick off with inbound threats. Now, what do all these logos have in common? Exactly. They are part of a very big list of companies that have been hacked, specifically social engineering attacks, which form around 90% of all the attacks we see. And beyond that, ransomware, 40% of those attacks start with a phishing email. Socially engineered attacks are essentially the psychological manipulation, getting the information out of someone, tricking them into believing they're in a safe situation and divulging sensitive or personal information to the hackers. If we look at some of these logos, I mean, Google, for example, committed $10 billion last year to their cybersecurity budget. Facebook, more than $13 billion, and yet they're still being hacked. Essentially, we always say when you know, you're at risk or when you've been you know, a victim of these kinds of attacks, the goal is get back to those foundations. How can we secure that layer and ultimately kick forward from there? But as we keep seeing, that is far easier said than done. And how are hackers doing this? We know, as you know, people, 90% of us post both socially and professionally on social media. And you know, why not? LinkedIn, for example, for professional purposes, it's great to broaden your network, interact with prospective employees. It's a really fabulous tool. However, for hackers, it's a dream. They've got access to our digital footprint. They've got all this information that we're sharing on a day-to-day basis. Hackers essentially use machine learning to comb through social media, news wires, to harvest information and data about each of us individually. Here's an example of how that's happened, you know, to that effect. This is anonymized data, but it's all based on a real-life example that we saw. So here, a hacker has used machine learning algorithm to crawl through news wires. They've come across a consulting firm that's advising a bank and a tech company on a joint venture. Through LinkedIn, they identify the New York-based CFO and the senior partner consulting advising on the merger. They find a post that the CFO is speaking at a conference, and they're excited about doing that. And on the day of the conference, they send an email to the CFO at which they get an out of office. They're able to get the name and the contact of his backup and know that he goes by the name of Andy. Using all of this information, they create a fake email that looks like it's being forwarded to the CFO's backup, requesting a money transfer to an updated account. Simple. Here, I've shared some anonymized customer data from one of our customer portals. And just to give an overview, what you see from the portal is how many malicious emails you've had come into your environment over a given period. You've then got this sort of event timeline where you can drill into the events themselves and see why it's been flagged by the machine learning algorithm as malicious. You can then see what the end user has done, whether they've deleted it, marked it as safe, carried on with their day, whatever. So you've got all that data there. Ultimately, what I'm trying to demonstrate from this section of the presentation is we're all at risk, as we've discussed today. We've all been a part of, we're all going to be, at some point, unfortunately, attacked. Everyone's at risk. And it's complicated. We can draw out sort of general trends that, it's a holiday, it's Black Friday, or it's Christmas, and they're capitalizing on that. Or, the company is in the press because they're being acquired or they're merging. Therefore, hackers know all this information, and there's likely to be an increase in attacks. However, even with those sort of broad trends, it's very complicated. There's no sort of easy sort of step to make sure that we're all protected moving forward, which is why we advocate for machine learning algorithms and that sort of behavioral intelligence to kind of be far more proactive rather than reactive. So what we can see is that investment alone isn't enough. We need to be assessing what we're using. We need to be speaking with our people and understanding where the sort of gaps are, how that we can empower them and not impact their productivity. We need to be investing wisely, so we need to know the gaps that are in our tech stack and how can we fill them, how can we make sure the tools we've got integrate with them, each other, but also our culture, our environment. And then the final piece is putting people first. So how can we make sure that people are responding, they understand the training, the relevance behind the training. We've got in-the-moment warnings, which basically notify you as the attack's coming in, rather than a sort of, right, we're going to do a monthly training that's maybe not going to bear so much relevance to your day-to-day. So it's all those sort of three things: assess, invest, and putting your people first is what the ultimate sort of mini conclusion for the inbound, what we'd recommend looking at. So let's move on to outbound risks now. So to reiterate, this is anything leaving your environment. So this could be via misdirected emails, misattached files, or data exfiltration. And data exfiltration doesn't necessarily have to be malicious. It can be negligence. It can be mistaken. There's all sorts of different ways that we see data leaving your company's environment. This is particularly important, of course, within highly regulated environments. So we work a lot with legal, FinServ companies where you're being heavily audited, so you need something in place to protect you. Accenture's annual report suggested that there was a 67% increase in these sorts of breaches over the last few years. And again, it's complicated. We're working now in a hybrid working model. We've got the Great Resignation. We've got a tricky financial situation. Again, we're heading into very turbulent times. Naturally, that's when we start to see these risks increase. You've got overworked employees. They're stressed. They're tired. There's maybe less people in the team. Often when people are trying to get around irrelevant policies or cumbersome security postures, these accidents happen more regularly. Here I've got some more anonymized customer data. This is on the outbound side, so misdirected email. This is from a FinServ customer who didn't think that misdirected email was an issue within their environment. We can see here there's been 164 for the last quarter, so pretty high for someone that thought it wasn't necessarily an issue. And we really do see this with misdirected email. We tend to call it the iceberg risk, and relates back to one of the stats we saw on the last slide, that this risk is happening about 38 times more than IT leaders are aware of. Now, all of us know that any one of these could have a crippling effect on the company. And again, obviously not mentioning any names, but some that we've seen recently, we've had HR directors sending 20 CVs for prospective employees out to one of those prospective employees along with salary expectations. Luckily, they were flagged and they didn't send the email. Similarly, details around a £20 million acquisition about to send to the wrong company that would have, rocked the whole deal, ended the whole deal. Luckily, it was flagged and prevented. So, yeah, big risk on the outbound side. And as I say, this is a real iceberg risk that is happening far more than we're aware of. As a result of this sort of turbulent time, we're seeing some key trends across data loss prevention. So I just wanted to sort of draw some of these out. What we did tend to see is that, we're good at monitoring data loss. We're aware of data loss, but we didn't necessarily cover the P in DLP. We were just sort of monitoring. So how can we prevent? Now, doing this first up through consolidating DLP policies. So making sure that we're updating them. We're no longer flagging for things that are relevant to our current environment. How can we consolidate and therefore make it far easier for, one, empowering the end user, but also making it far easier for security professionals to report and remediate. Investing in tools that integrate with one another, so we're augmenting, not replicating. Again, take the burden off security professionals, empower the end user so that they can be making the response and potentially remediating themselves, but whilst giving the security team the visibility into the risks that you have. That falls into automation and prevention as well. So again, with the in-the-moment learnings, how can you be making sure that people are aware of it as it's happening rather than reacting once the incident has occurred? And then the final piece of this is contextualized training. So training is limited. We tend to do it in sort of quarterly, monthly, a sort of more regular structured cadence, not necessarily relevant to the situation or the person. So how can we make sure it's tailored to HR, for example? Or if we've got a team that are particularly prone to risks, how can we make sure we're changing and adapting our training to that team specifically? So to conclude, what can we be doing? What can we focus on this month and beyond? And how can we best make the most out of this Cyber Awareness Month? Many security leaders are starting to take steps to secure the human layer and mitigate the risk of human error in relation to email. How are they doing that? They're creating awareness, particularly throughout the exec layer, of the risk of human error. So hopefully, it does tend to be a trend, unfortunately, that often it is the exec layer that are sending things home to print or are sending things to a spouse because they don't necessarily know the policies are there. So how can we make sure it's a sort of top-down approach? It needs to be a shift, and it can't just sort of lay at the door of security to sort of make that shift across the company. So it's got to be, a team effort. They're investing in tools that focus specifically on human behavior and human interactions with email. So again, just going back to that point that it is still our number one threat vector. If we can sort of batten down the hatches and secure that as much as possible, that's going to be a huge step in sort of securing your posture from a cyber perspective. And then the final point, more tailored training and awareness and adapting to focusing on teams or functions that have either bigger threats or are more prone to human error. So the main aims of these are ultimately to gain visibility, to have risk score for employees, and using behavioral intelligence and machine learning to predict and protect rather than react. There's huge benefits to this as well from not only obviously avoiding costly human error, but increasing your customer trust. We work with a number of customers that use having this additional human layer of security to promise that their customer data is secure. It can increase revenue. It can improve your sales pipeline. So there's huge benefits of this to your customer base as well. And ultimately, as we've been discussing today, how can we make security more of a team effort, bring the sort of wider company in rather than it just being a sort of security focus, so not working in silos. So to conclude, my sort of key takeaways that are brought up here with the Forrester recommendations are assess, invest, and put people first. So how can we be assessing your current capabilities and working with people in your organization to understand what does and doesn't work? Investing wisely, so making sure you are partnering with people that understand that it's an ever-changing cyber world and we can't sort of stay stuck and stagnant. We've got to sort of evolve and adapt. And choose tools that integrate with your current setup. Going back to that, augment, don't replicate. Find the gaps in your tech stack, fill those gaps, and make sure that you're integrating with your email environment, your SIEM, whatever it may be. Make sure all those tools are working with each other, and then your security team has greater visibility and ease to manage. And yeah, we ultimately say that machine learning algorithms and behavioral intelligence is the best way to sort of stay ahead of that and be proactive rather than reactive. And putting your people first is ultimately the goal there, because whilst they're unfortunately our biggest threat, they're also our biggest asset. They're the engine that are driving our company. So how can we empower them and make sure that they're bought into the world of security rather than isolated from it? Yes, I'm gonna steal Ken's idea, and any questions, you can have some of our lovely stash. We've got hats, socks, so yeah, fire away.
There is a bit of a contest on for best swag.
Yeah.
In the corner there. So, any questions for Lucy? I think Colin. Sorry, you stood by the light, so you had this kind of silhouette.
Email obviously, whether it's fundamentally
Stand over here so I can see you.
email obviously is fundamentally broken.
Yeah.
Because it's, in the most part, when we send something to someone, it's like posting.
Okay, yeah.
Whilst now you can actually put it in and go in and secure it, encrypt it, things like that. Almost no company does that. Surely that's the start of the text. Basically, you know who you're sending it to, and they know it's from you.
Yeah. So you're advocating for encryption?
Well, it's not just encryption, it's just making encryption like normal.
More normal, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess.
Because at the moment it's really hard to set up for the average person.
Yeah, I guess the issues we've seen with encryption is one, it's quite reliant on both parties having the same compatible tooling so that you're not impacting productivity so they can open anything encrypted. And I guess goes back to our sort of machine learning, more proactive rather than saying, right, we're just going to, everything that's sent externally needs to be encrypted. We want it to be more malleable, more adaptable to sort of the situation at hand. So that's why we go more with the give end users as much sort of leeway as possible, but know that you've got this additional, set of eyes, if you like, making sure that nothing, bad is coming in or going out.
Phil, I think you have your hand.
Yeah. So, given the solution kind of detects errors before people make them, before they click send, I guess that could lead to people sort of feeling like they don't have to consider what they do because the system will find those errors for them. Is that something that Tessian recommends? And if not, what would you suggest end users do so that they keep in mind that it's still their responsibility and that they still, no system is infallible?
Yeah, great question. So one, it's as soon as they've pressed send, so it's happening in sort of milliseconds. You wouldn't know that it's happening, but as soon as they've clicked send or as soon as something's coming in with a last layer to sort of check it. I guess, again, it plays into sort of end user comms and bringing people into the situation. So we have, despite there being, a number of flags, as you saw from the anonymized data, that's on average 5 flags per 30 days across the user base or something. It's a low flag rate. So this isn't, we're not, we saw with the Uber hack, that was MFA fatigue. We really don't want to have that sort of fatigue in notifications. It's very specific to the scenario in hand. So we don't tend to find that people get sort of tired of it or, okay, it's just another tick box that I say yes or no to. It's very in the moment and contextual. So I'd say that's the key. And I can see Chris nodding, hopefully agrees with me because they use us at Aztec. So yeah, it's not happening all the time, basically, I think would be the key there.
Yeah, could I comment anecdotally as someone who has used this type of system? Yeah. When you get that pop-up, the message, if you've communicated correctly to the users, is, holy cow, I just dodged a bullet. It's definitely not, oh yeah, I know, it's going to tell me. The other thing is, of course, that people like me are reporting on this stuff. And if I'm seeing someone in a particular department getting 25 a month when everyone's getting 1, well, I'm going to be giving them some one-to-one training as well. But you really do get that shuddering feeling when you get the pop-up and go, oh no, what a wally, it's the wrong John Smith.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Good. So I've got one.
Yes.
So one of the things you mentioned, and it's the thing that kind of always puts a light bulb on. So you talked about empowering the user, giving the user the ability to, because effectively, solutions like this, they pop up and go, are you really sure you want to do this? Because I think it's anomalous and here's why. And if you wind that back to trouble tickets for can you please allow this sender through the spam filter because they're a known customer. That sits in the security department's inbox for as long as it takes until someone gets around to it, and some poor devil has to spend half their morning saying, release, 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 release. No, don't release, release, release. That's a pain. One of the benefits of solutions like this is that you're saying to the user, look, are you really sure you want to do this? Is it just this world that's doing that, or are you seeing that in other areas of IT operations where the power is being put back in the user's hands?
I don't know if that's one for me or one from the floor. I mean, looking at Tom and Alex, nothing springs to mind. I mean, I guess.
There's a lot of the governance in 365.
Yeah.
You say, okay, you've got a file here, you're attaching it to an email, it's got customer credit card data in it, do you want to do this?
Yeah.
And you say, okay, I do want to do this, I've got to do this, it's the only way I can do it. You tell the people that we've got this, you say, please release it. It releases, but it's documented, and you need someone to look at the process to say, why are we sending that? Customer credit card information over the internet, unsecured,
It makes, and promise no sales chat, because I know you said I'd be booed off the stage, but I guess what we're trying to do and move into more with our DLP module is the ability to sort of branch out of just email security. So if you've got things set up in M365, like data classification, we can set up rules to say, make sure you've labeled that correctly, make sure it's, not going externally when it says internally. So we're branching out and hoping to cover it that way would be my response to that, I think.
You actually link into the Microsoft classification?
Yes, yeah. So we work closely with Microsoft, so we integrate. We've got a graph API, which means anything you've got set up in there will help inform the algorithm. And like classification, we can set up policies to sort of sense check.
An email as being internal. If you embed a document that's been classified as internal, it will spot that and say that this is an external email address, therefore.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll talk to you after.
Perfect.
Earlier on, you indicated that 3 in 8 people who have a Facebook account.
Yes.
What would you recommend to mitigate the possibility of data breaches using Facebook?
I guess, and unfortunately, we don't yet.
I know you don't.
No, I know. I thought I'd just say that as a sort of disclaimer. I guess just note, educating ourselves around social media privacy, and they're ever changing the rules, making sure that we're sort of keeping our profiles or whatever as secure as possible. I think, and again, maybe one for the floor. I think that's the best we can do from a sort of individual aspect to sort of protect ourselves. I'm afraid nothing extraordinary.
With so many people using Facebook,
Yeah.
it obviously is a cyber risk.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I guess it's back to digital footprints, and that's the other buzzwords that we use in cyber is that social engineering aspect, that LinkedIn.
Yeah.
There's pieces of jigsaw puzzle, piece there,
Yeah.
all your dog's called Fido.
Yeah.
And it all
Yeah, exactly. I think, what we saw from the example, just being careful about what you're putting on your out of office. Tiny things, but we actually, it's so easy to think I'm just trying to be as helpful as possible if I am out of office, but just thinking that one step more of actually am I giving away quite clear clues that could be used against me. So, yeah.
If there's no more, go on, one last one,
I'll
Andrew.
just say one thing. Thank you very, very much for not saying that the end user of the week is me. I got so bored of hearing that particular piece of information. Users in networks do their job and do their job well. What they're not brilliant is that interface to technology, and I think this may well be a very interesting step to helping what are some of key employees to do their jobs just that little bit better.
Yeah.
If you talk to the financial ombudsman anywhere, and the Jersey Channel Financial Ombudsman, one of those key individuals, they'll tell you that misdirected emails damage their cause are a major concern for the ombudsman and for the way in which particularly financial services organisations fail the time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's our key takeaway, put people first, because as you say, we can't help it. You know, even security professionals, if you're stressed, tired, you know, Dave's saying you accidentally send the email to the wrong person, it happens. So how can we empower rather than scare people off? And, you know,
if you chastise them all the time.
Exactly. Some of the bigger firms is two flags or one flag and you're out. So, you know, get away from that sort of scaremongering.
Not allowed to do that. We've got German Workers' Council to deal with.
Excellent. Lucy, thank you very much indeed.
You.